Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Cooking with Creatives. Today, I'm trying something a little bit different. I've invited my friend Sharang, who I met through a mutual friend at a party recently, a Zoom party. So that was lots of fun. And found out that he just recently edited this book that is all about live action role playing games, all themed around sex. I thought that that's super creative. That's totally in the theme of the show. Charang is a game designer who teaches at various places, but does a lot of really cool, interesting things. And I don't want to talk more about him. I want to let him talk about himself. Please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, post pictures of what we're making. Sharang, what are we making?
So first, thanks, Spencer, for inviting me. So today we are making two and maybe a half thing. We'll see if there's time for that. We are making Samin Nosrat's recipe from her book Sulfur Acid Heat of Persian chicken, which is a chicken that's marinated in a lemon, yogurt, and saffron marinade that you then roast. We're making Smitten Kitchen's recipe for broccoli Parmesan fritters that I'm doctoring a bit because I've made it a number of times. I like adding my own things. And if we have time, we'll make a nice beet salad on the side using techniques from America's Test Kitchen. We're drawing in different things, and we're going to make a lovely three-course meal that will last me a few days.
So I know I mentioned that you were a game designer, but can you talk a little bit more about what that means? Like, what is a game designer, and what
So it's funny. I was actually talking to a publisher yesterday, and I was talking about how I'm unlike many people. I don't like specializing in like one kind of game design or anything, even. So I consider myself a game designer, artist, and writer is what I tend to say. And game designer to most people, when I say I'm a game designer, they tend to be like, oh, you make video games or you make mobile games or most video games. And I tend to tell people, no, I have worked on video games and the like. But my focus is actually on analog games, right? So then people are like, oh, board games. And like, I have made board games. I do continue to do that, but my focus, my artistic focus is actually on role-playing, storytelling games, that kind of thing. So when I say role-playing games, it's easy to think like Dungeons and Dragons is probably the biggest example that most people are familiar with. That is a role-playing game. But I also like to not just play Dungeons and Dragons because that is oops, recorded stuff everywhere. That is what people. I'm going to use my hands because I normally do. I was going to be clean for the video, but I'm not going to do that.
It's okay. I'm a total mess.
Yeah, I'm a much messier cook on my own normally than I am on this video. So Dungeons & Dragons, but people tend to think of role-playing games in a very limited fashion. I like to talk about like independent role-playing games that deal with different themes, things like that. I also work with LARP a lot, which is live action role-playing games. And again, when I say LARP, people tend to think of there's that movie with Paul Rudd in it where people are running around in the woods and hitting each other with swords and throwing beanbags at each other, which definitely is a legitimate and popular form of LARP. But I also talk about things like one of my favorite LARPs is a game by a company called Thorny Games. It's called Dialect. And it's a LARP where you play deaf Nicaraguan children creating sign language in order to communicate your deepest truth. And it's based on an actual historical event in Nicaragua in the 70s. And the authors of the game literally went to a deaf school in Nicaragua to do their research, right? So when I say games, sometimes people don't even know what that means. It's not video games, though it is included. And it's not just board games. It's this world of games that people don't even think about. And if you're familiar with things like immersive theater or like recreational, like historical reenactment, some of those elements can come into it. Though again, it is not only that. So yeah, so I consider myself a game designer, writer. I mean, I do a lot of essay writing work, like semi-academic, quasi-academic, and also popular stuff. And then I'm an artist because some of my works are hard to classify as games. So I'm just like, whatever, it's interactive, immersive performance thing. And then I show it in a gallery and like, what even is it? That's a lot about me, sorry. Though I did train as a bioengineer. I have 2 bioengineering degrees, and then I'm like, screw that.
So you're a Renaissance man.
Maybe. I don't know, the modern world doesn't support the Renaissance man anymore. Also, I don't want to be pretentious. I'm very pretentious. I don't want to be more pretentious by calling myself a Renaissance.
Cool. So while we're putting this together, can you tell me a little bit more about your book?
Yeah. So my book is called Honey and Hot Wax: An Anthology of Erotic Art Games. I made it 2 years ago. My co-editor Lucien and I started talking about what interests us in games, and we came up with the idea of sexuality because both of us are involved in like a lot of the like kink spaces and things like that in New York. And we said, what if we make an anthology of games that deal explicitly with sex? Now this is a thing, right? Because when I say games, just like I said, people tend to think of video games. People tend to think of games as a very like juvenile art form, right? Like the only purpose of games is to mindlessly waste time. But that's like saying the only purpose of music is to listen to while driving, right? That's like the same sort of logic, right? Which is not entirely accurate, right? Games can be a legitimate art form with its own systems of meaning making, its own like rhetorics and politics and you know narratives and everything that you're trying to convey through any other art form, right? One thing that is true, however, is that many mainstream games tend to focus on a narrow aspect of human experience, right? Many mainstream games tend to focus on, I'm just checking on my broccoli to see the softness of it. Yeah, many mainstream games tend to focus on warfare and killing and violence, right? Not to say there's nothing useful to be said about that. Human history is a lot about warfare and killing and violence, but we were like, we want to make famous, or not famous, make well-known more games that are about other topics, like human relationships, sexuality. So much of our other art form, other, you know, systems of meaning making, be it painting or poetry or popular music, is about human relationships. Games tend to be about killing, right? So can we get away from that? And then another thing about game that was very interesting to us is this idea of what are the affordances of a game versus another medium, right? Ian Bogost famously writes about, I mean, he's not the first person to talk about it, but he made it famous through his book, Procedural Rhetoric. He talks about games as the procedural rhetoric of a game. Games involve you taking action. They involve you making moves. They involve you engaging in procedures, right? Verbs. That is something that isn't as prevalent in other art forms. If you are listening to music, you are doing one thing the whole time. You're listening. Obviously, you're doing a lot of cognitive things that are important, but in terms of major verbs you're listening, right? Games will make you do a lot of other things, moving in certain ways, doing things with cards, reading, listening, watching, speaking, you know, and all the choices of which of these things you make your players do conveys meaning in a different way, right? And so we were interested in games that talk about sex, right? We were also interested in some games. What if you perform sex acts as part of the game itself, not as an end, right? So not like we are playing this game in order to have sex, but we are performing sex acts in order to play this game, right? What does the act of me, I'm going to be very explicit here, what does the act of me giving you a blowjob, what does that convey narratively, politically, artistically? Can you use sex act within a framework to convey different kinds of meanings. So that was another thing that's really interesting to us. So a portion of the games in the anthology are just role-playing games in the more traditional sense. Maybe in like certain traditions of role-playing games, like American freeform and Nordic role-playing games, that just talk about sex and sexuality. But some of the games ask you, like, in this game, you are going to be fondling another person's genitals. In this game, you are going to be blowing someone or performing oral sex, right? And so we were really interested in, can we push the boundaries of what verbs are artistically meaningful and appropriate in a game set. And of course, disclaimer is that obviously we're not saying everyone should play these games or can play these games or should just jump into playing these games, right? You need to be comfortable. Naomi Clark in her introduction talks about the value of even just reading these games. But also, we have a whole chapter. We commissioned Maury Brown, a famous playwright, to write a whole chapter on consent and safety. How do you play these games that might ask you to do things that you don't often do in games? How do you play these safely in a way that you are getting the maximum enjoyment and meaning out of it? And how do you stop when you need to stop and things like that? That's also very important. We had a multi-layered process of coming up with that. We had lots of editors. We got 2 grants from the Effing Foundation for Sex Positivity to make this book. And so we even had the director of that foundation, who is an expert in the field as well, to read each game. And she gave us very good concrete feedback for many of them. In addition to the editors, we read them. The safety designer read them. And so we were trying to be very careful about, are these games safe in a psychological sense and other senses to play? So yeah, it was a big undertaking.
Can you tell me about the various strategies that you've found helpful in participating in role-playing games in the days of COVID?
Yeah, so one of the things I like about analog games is the fact that it does bring people together, right? Like, you can have a game night with friends, you can invite them for dinner, play board games, they're open games. So, of course, and then LARPs are an embodied form of play, like you are bodies moving in space to create meaning, right? And so when COVID happened, we're like, things are going to be harder. And so there has been a growing, I don't want to say field, a growing movement of playing role-playing games online, even before COVID, partially because, not everyone has people in their community around them who is interested in role-playing games, right? There's been a lot of digital role-playing game stuff, and not all LARPs can be played digitally because you need the physicality, but people are designing or have been designing LARPs to be played digitally. So there's some of that, but more now, people are more interested in, these role-playing games that I used to play physically. I would go to my friend's house and play Dungeons & Dragons, or now people are like, okay, can we build tools to play them digitally? Zoom has been really helpful. I know Zoom is probably making a huge profit with all the people buying Zoom. They probably have a not insignificant share coming from role-playing gamers. So that, now, the book, for example, is interesting because we've been working on the book for 2 years, right, before COVID. And so when we were about to, so the book came out, while we're filming this, the book came out last week. So at the last step when we were doing layout design, we decided to also in the book, mention which of the games are easy to play online and which are not. For example, Cleo Davis's game, Pass the Sugar Please, is very easy to play online. In fact, a theater company worked with us and Cleo, and gave royalties to Cleo and everything, to run Pass the Sugar Please as an online immersive theater piece. It's a game where you all play people who were at a sex party last night, a BDSM sex party, but you're all masked, you don't know each other. And then you come to this tea party to celebrate your friend's birthday, and you realize, wait a minute, I think I hooked up with that person, but we can't say it out loud because that would scandalize the others because you don't know that everyone else was also at the party. And the whole game is you trying to communicate to that person what you enjoyed about the experience last night only by describing the food in front of you, right? And it's a really lovely game, and we tested it, and we ran it through this immersive theater company. It's a very easy and good game to just play over Zoom. As long as you have Zoom, as long as you have like PDFs of documents open, you don't even need that many. It's very small. I moved it. You can play it over Zoom, and this experience of still doing stuff with your friends is somewhat translated through Zoom. Obviously, my preference is to be physically with people if possible. That is not possible with COVID. So this is like kind of a next best thing. But for many people, this is the only way they play role-playing games, right? They might live in the middle of nowhere where no one plays role-playing games. This is the only way of enjoying them. And it's cool that other people are discovering this. It's also a great way to play different. Like, let's say you are in a Dungeons and Dragons group, right? And they don't want to play anything else. It's a great way to, there are lots of communities online that you can join that play lots of other kinds of games. And so role-playing games has been seeing this sort of a shift because of COVID. And I think it's been interesting. And so, yeah, so in the book, obviously it's like one of the games is like a LARP with like 10 people that you play, and you have sleeping bags set up and you do each other's nails and things. Obviously, that is only possible if you are isolating with 10 other people who want to play this game with you. But some of the games are very playable online through technology. And we're actually glad it turned out that way, because we weren't planning on that. We started making this book 2 years ago, right? But it did turn out that way, so it's pretty cool. Yeah. So I've mixed all my stuff. I was talking almost ad nauseum. And now we're going to add the broccoli. Spencer was wise and drained it. I'm lazy and I'm going to spoon it out. So yeah, add the broccoli. And then the best thing to do is use a hard implement to kind of like mash the broccoli and the other stuff together. I would not recommend using like a potato masher. That you don't want to cream it completely. You want some chunkiness in your fritters. It's tastier that way. Just keeping an eye on my chicken as well. But do use a hard implement to partially masticate the broccoli into your other ingredients, because you don't want it to be, the chunks, you don't want it to be too huge, especially if you have a lot of stem in there. That can be annoying. So the mashing of that will help.
So while we finish mashing, can you talk a little bit about the artistry of gaming?
Yeah, and I like to use the word masticating because it's a sexier word. Anyway, yeah, so it's interesting, right? Because again, we said people don't think of games as art, right? Which is sad. Mary Flanagan in Critical Play talks about the idea that games might be some of the earliest forms of art, right? There are archaeological sites that show mancala boards, like but built into the ground, that are like some of the oldest archaeological things we find that we think are human-made, right? And so Mary makes sorry, I can say Mary because I know her. Normally I'd say Flanagan. She was my professor. But talks about games as the oldest art form, right? And initially, a lot of games, many of our ancient games, were not just about fun either, right? Like the game of Senet, for example, which is ancient Egyptian, it's really famous, had a lot of spiritual components to it, right? The royal game of which is one of the, again, the oldest board games we have, it's like in the, Fertile Crescent, has all these like political and spiritual components. The act of playing them wasn't just fun, it had all these other meanings. So even from ancient times, we have this idea of other meanings of play. And then even when we engage with children and play, it isn't just about fun. So Mary makes a compelling argument in a whole chapter in that book about Victorian doll play, right? And how children playing with dolls is a way that families and people, adults, reinforce and teach traditional like ways of behaving socially. Like, this is what a family is, right? Through this idea of play house with these dolls. Of course, Mary then also argues that when you give young kids dolls, they don't just play yay and they go to work. They often then decapitate the dolls and drown them and make them ill and do things. And so this play becomes both a site for reinforcing social norms and also resisting against social norms, right? So the act of play is rarely just play at all levels, right? And so you can argue that every act of playing any kind of game is in some sense an exercise in creating art and meaning. You could argue that if you want to go very broad, right? But if you want to go less broadly, games are made by people, right? And they involve a lot of creativity design. It is not easy to make a game that is compelling for people to play, right? Games take a lot of time. Like whenever I teach game design, I often teach adults as well. Like I teach in college, they're all adults, but I also teach workshops from time to time. I'm like, great, make a game now. And everyone's often like, what? This is really hard, right? It's not easy. And game designers aren't just, keeping track of numbers. They're also being like, what is engaging someone? What meaning am I giving by making players do this? There's a great example of a board game I played once where you played the DC superheroes, and you were collecting gear. But to collect the gear, you were spending like punch cards, like card which said like punch and kick, and I'm like, so am I Superman? Am I like punching people and stealing their gear? That doesn't seem like something Superman would do, right? And so the rhetorical procedural rhetoric of this, right? What meaning am I making by doing this? All these things go into making games. So it is absolutely a very creative and artistic thing. And one can argue that a lot of like immersive theater or a lot of the work made by the Dada artists, for example. So maybe you have a whole chapter on that. Like a lot of the Dada artists made these interactive artworks, right? That you used your verbs. Again, you use procedure, you use your body to appreciate the art, right? So games are very similar, where the artistry comes in thinking about what do these verbs have to convey, but also synergizing, to use a very businessy term, synergizing that with all the other parts of the game, the like narrative, if there is one explicit in the art set, the visual art of the game, if it's a video game, the sound design, or theatrical game, the sound design, the graphic design, the manufactured components. I would argue a good game harmonizes all these elements to become something worthy of artistic analysis. Yeah.
Great.
Games are art.
Great.
I'm putting some veggie oil. Use a high heat oil like veggie oil. Let your pan heat up. My partner got me a cooking class at the Culinary Institute once, and one of the things they told me was things stick to pans because the pan isn't hot enough. So make sure it's hot and oiled, and then so give it a moment. That's why you don't use an olive oil, because it'll smoke. Once it's warm enough, wait a little bit. We can start. Put dollops of the batter in, and then flatten it with your spatula. And it doesn't take that long. If you make smaller fritters, the total will take longer, but each fritter won't take that long. And I've also found, and this is, I don't know why, the more, like, as you start cooking it, great, but as you make more fritters in the same session, your subsequent fritters will cook better. I don't know why.
Well, it's like we talked about this in the scallion pancake episode. The first pancake is always bad.
Yeah, it's a thing. Okay, so I'm gonna start putting. Don't crowd your pan with too many at once. Make sure there's room between them. And don't make giant mega fritters. They will be a little harder to cook. So I always try and say make them like smaller than the palm of your hand.
I'm gonna make them pretty small because I like I like bite size.
Even because the recipe doesn't call for onion, but I add onion in mine, so that changes, the volumes of things. So.
Yeah, for sure. Can you talk a little bit about queerness in relationship to role-playing games?
Yeah. So, like, one of the things, for example, one of the things about this book is the foundation, and us discuss the idea of diversity and how we wanted diverse voices to be making these games. And we specifically have a lot of queer people. And like queerness in games is interesting because, especially in this context of sex, right? Because non-normative ways of having sex, many people consider that to be a form of resistance and a form of thinking about queerness, right? Embodying queer, because a lot of queer people around the world are discriminated solely because of who they have sex with, right? Like that's at some level the basis of why people are discriminated against for their queerness, right? And so this idea extends that if you're thinking of the word queer as a broad sense, which is what a lot of academics do, the idea of having sex in these ways, just like having sex in kinky ways, can be considered a form of queerness and rethinking what sex is, which is important because by rethinking what sex is or can be, you are creating the environment where queer people who maybe their only difference is that they have sex with certain people and not other people, but you're creating an environment where by rethinking what sex is, you allow space for queer people to exist, right? Mm-hmm. That's one level. The other level is that I have so games, role-playing games, there's a term, I'm flipping my things now, and you might flip them more than once if you want them to be a bit more brown. There's a concept in role-playing games called bleed, right? It was made popular by Emily Care Moss. And the concept of bleed is this idea that, the concept of bleed is this idea that when you're embodying a character, emotions from your real self can intrude into your character's self, and emotion from the character can intrude into your real self. For example, if I'm playing with my best friend, so one of my closest friends from grad school, so we were playing in the LARP once, and we had to have a fight, and it was very hard for me to actually have a fight with her because I didn't feel like I had a fight with her as a person. So our characters, it was hard for me. I couldn't really get into the fight because of the bleed. Similarly, I was playing a game where I was supposed to be jealous and angry with the other person. It was a 5-day-long game. And by the end of the game, I was actually really annoyed at the character. And so I was really annoyed at the human. And I had to tell myself, no, I'm not annoyed at him. That was just the character. So that's bleed, right? And I know a lot of people have used games as a way of exploring queerness. I know at least 2 people who have transitioned gender after trying in many LARPs to play different genders to see how embodying another gender feels to them. I know a couple of people who have been like, maybe I'm not super straight after playing in role-playing games and playing with like attraction and romance on the characters. So in addition to this theoretical thing about like queer sex in games, is itself the act of clearing sex and normalizing, not normalizing non-normative sex, a weird sentence, but also in a practical sense, these kinds of games have allowed people to explore and think about queerness by embodying, right? Rather than by just reading or watching or listening, but by embodying, by engaging in procedural rhetoric. It's another way of understanding queerness, right? Just like other forms of art let you understand queerness in certain ways, games let you understand queerness in different ways. I wrote an article on Eurogamer where it talks specifically about there is a need to show less normative ways of having sex, like science fiction. We tend to rethink so many things through science fiction and fantasy, but we don't often rethink what sex could be like. So I wrote an essay about games that actually do that and how pushing the boundaries through games are pushing the boundaries of what is sex and what is acceptable sex and what is normative sex. And again, by allowing you to procedurally experience it is another way of engaging with that subject. So because we have these two, like we have a roast and a fried, I want something fresh. So I'm making a salad. I'm making a beet arugula salad with a caraway, lemon, and goat cheese dressing. And I think Spencer can put the recipe in the notes. It's really tasty. It's also really cool that you don't have to roast the beet. You can actually microwave the beets, and it's very easy and lovely. So have it whatever you want. I recommend having it with a salad to add some freshness. But yeah, I think Spencer's going to make a different kind of salad. It is.
Yeah, I'm just going to have basically just some arugula with a little bit of lemon on it, just for a little bit of freshness with the heavy chicken and broccoli. And I'm gonna just keep going. Fritters are really looking great here. I'm really excited to eat these. And that probably needs to cool for
10 minutes-ish, yeah. And the reason you do that is because if you carve it too quickly, the juices will run out. And you want to let it cool a bit because the juices will get restored into the meat, is what I understand. Again, I'm not a food scientist or a chef.
My chicken's like falling apart. It's so good.
Yes!
That's how you know I did it right. Just finishing up plating. Although I think mine looks pretty great, I will say. Look at this.
That does look very great.
Great. So I just finished plating my chicken, my broccoli fritters, and a little bit of arugula salads for some freshness on the plate. Wow, this was so much fun working on this project, learning something new. I know for most of my musician friends, you know, they might have never knew anything about some of these topics that we talked about today. So I'm excited that you might learn something new. Please go check out his book. It's really great. I got to preview it. I really enjoyed his chapter that I got to engage with, and I hope that you enjoy it too. Where can we find that?
Yeah, so the book is again called Honey and Hot Wax, an anthology of erotic art games. Again, a preface that you don't have to play every game to enjoy the book. A lot of the joy of reading games, also by reading how it, reading that. But it is published by Pelgrane Press, so it's on their website, and the link should be in the notes. If you are an actual role-playing gamer, it will be up on DriveThruRPG sometime soon, if you're familiar with that. And then you can find me on Twitter at Sharang Biswas, which is just my full name. And I tend to post about all my projects, and it links to my website if you're interested in that and seeing the other stuff I make. But thank you so much, Spencer, for inviting me to this. You're going to have a very decadent lunch. It's going to be lovely. We have a lot of leftovers because I live alone. So
yeah, I'm so excited. Please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel. If you make this dish, please post a picture of it somewhere and tag me in it, either in the comment sections below, Instagram, Twitter, wherever. I'm so excited that this episode went so well. So let's take a bite and see how it turned out.
Woot.
I'm just gonna use my fingers because I'm that classy. It's so juicy. It's so moist. I'm gonna get this all the time.
The saffron really comes through.
It does. It really does. Anyways, thank you for such a great recipe, and I enjoy the rest of your day.
You too, Spencer.
Okay. Bye.